Hi everyone, we're here with Paul, or I'm here, not we, because there's only two people. I'm here with Paul Perry, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and why you're watching this video, and hopefully you'll understand. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Paul Perry. I'm running for Congress in Pennsylvania's 7th District. Born and raised in Norristown. I'm running in part because I got tired of what I was seeing on the news and figured if not me, then who, and if not now, then when. I come from a family of small business owners and veterans who were dedicated to a career in service, and I went into service myself. Used to be a teacher and a school leader. I run a nonprofit for kids right now, and figured it was time for some new blood and some non-career politicians to join the fight and push for policies that frankly put families first and make their lives better. And so my pitch is that I've been working on behalf of kids and families my entire life, and that's the job of any good congressperson, right? To look out over their district and get the families in their district the resources they need to thrive. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, awesome. So I have a lot of talking points that I'm looking at my list and I accidentally wrote twice. But to begin, I guess let's talk about healthcare. So the ACA isn't perfect. The AHCA is a shit show for the 1%. Not even the 1%, like the top 10th or whatever it is of 1%. And where do you stand, and what might we expect from you if you're voted in?
Sure, yeah. And for me, it's important to, first of all, link issues together. So, I studied public policy, and I worked with kids who every day they walk into your classroom with not just a healthcare problem, but they might have a, issue with jobs in their family, or they might have, something going on with the criminal justice system. So I tend to just come from the place that all the issues are linked, and that therefore our work needs to be highly intersectional. And so that's really important to me, number one, just as a framing point. But I do think, I'm a big proponent for 100% universal health care. I think we have the wealth and the ability to get it done. It's a challenge that many of our peer nations have figured out, and for a lot of different reasons we haven't. Part of that's powerful interests lining up against it. Part of that is not being able to find a structure that works for everyone. So I think Medicare for All is an approach that we can all get on board with, and really pushing for a single payer system that is affordable for families. I think that's the big thing. Affordability. Portability is huge. I run a nonprofit where it's very difficult for us to provide healthcare to employees across the country because of the limitations of ACA. And so I think we need to keep ACA and improve on it and move towards a single payer system. But for me, the real question is, how, but also when. We just need to make a moral, ethical commitment to 100% care, not just coverage, care. Because a lot of people can be covered, but they're still paying through the nose, or the drugs are unaffordable. I have a 74-year-old father who is in the VA healthcare system, and I watch him take 18 pills every single day, and it's very real for our family, and he doesn't always have the care he needs. I have a nephew who's a Purple Heart veteran from Iraq, who hasn't always been able to get the mental health services that he needs. So I'm right there with a lot of families in the 7th District who are, struggling to get the care that they need. And there's a lot of different ways we can get it done, but we need to. It's time. It's beyond time.
Yeah. And just in relation to something that you said, I really liked how you were saying that your issues are intersectional, because they are, and that kind of is a good point to bring up where you feel on the mass incarceration, kind of in tandem to the war on drugs and even education and all of that. And I'm talking, I guess, education. This is going to be a bit of a topic, but education from K to 12 and what those kids have access to, because I have former experience as a just a daycare teacher for like 5 years, and I mean I've seen how like smaller daycare companies work and bigger daycare companies work, and how teachers aren't exactly paid what they should be paid, and then going even further to like college education, like should it be free? And if it is to be free, how do we pay for that? And then even further, like as far as vocational school, like what do you want to do for people who don't want to get a college degree but want to go for vocational school, and things like that, and trade. And then as far as mass incarceration and the war on drugs, how do we stop these for-profit prisons? What can we do to not do that anymore, because it's wasting so much money?
So you're talking to someone I've later in life I taught in prison, and I taught college level classes in prison. I understand what goes on inside prisons and the absolute wasted potential of people, and how it sending people to prison, I think, to some extent destroys communities, and we have to be honest with ourselves about that. So that's one. Me personally, like I'm a child of a failed war on drugs. So my mother was pregnant with me while she was behind bars for a drug conviction. And I think, frankly, my opponent, Pat Meehan, is a part of that, as a district attorney and a U.S. attorney, and I think that system hasn't worked, and we've massively enlarged the number of people we've had behind bars since the 1980s in a way that is just unconscionable and puts us on par with a lot of countries that have incredibly repressive regimes. It's a waste of taxpayer dollars in a large sense. So it's a massive challenge that we need to solve. I think banning private prisons outright is a good way to go, and making sure that there is public accountability in something as, I guess, sacred as if the state decides they want to lock someone away, handing that over to a private company, I think is not the way to go. It's dangerous, and it leads to some of the sort of violations that we've seen publicly. In terms of education, I mean, I think I'm for tuition-free college and debt-free, higher education. It's not that controversial. Like, we've done it before. We had this thing called the GI Bill, where we sent 16 million people to college essentially for free after they came back from the war. That was free college. Even after that, we had public universities that were like all but free for millions of people. So like, this isn't, people. The controversial part is companies and the government no longer making money off of the backs of young people. And a lot of people have a vested interest in keeping that system. I do not. I have hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans myself, from being, someone who did what I was told, went to school, got the best possible education, and now my chances to start a family and buy a house are in danger because of that system. And I think a lot of people in my generation, frankly, got a raw deal in that. And that's after a lot of our parents got basically free college. That's not fair. Period. And I think that's a lot of young people are energized about. And I'm ready to be their candidate for that, because the debt that we're laying on that next generation is unsustainable for that generation and the country. And it's wrong to tell people that they should go get an education and then burden them with that level of debt. It doesn't make sense. So I think we need to be really honest about that. So yeah, I think moving from a free K-12 system to a free K-16 or even K-20 system makes sense, and it's a grand challenge I think we can get done with restructuring the system. What President Obama did with moving towards, sort of full federal funding of loans, moving away from the private system, was good. I think there's been some retrenchment on that, but the principle has to be, getting more people into higher education. You asked about vocational sector as well. I think we could do a way better job on that. I'd advocate a national, challenge to, spend about 10 years just building out a vocational sector and really investing in that. Countries like Finland have done that. I've been to schools in Finland I've visited, and the nicest schools that I've seen are their vocational schools, because they invested at a national level in those schools. Something like 45% of the people in that nation are successful in vocational schools that are fully funded and just really well resourced. So I think we can do something like that. We can learn from other countries, and the issues are related. There's a school to prison pipeline, and we need to think about the ways that we direct a lot of kids in certain areas into prison, essentially. I think for the 7th district, the issue is a little bit different. It's more how to take, pretty good schools and help them be great with, enhancing curriculum, with, fair funding formulas, with, better teacher preparation. Those are some kind of the issues I think families in the 7th district are focused on, that I'll be focused on as well. I think the federal role is more to incentivize the states to use best practices. And someone particularly like me, I've been an educator my whole life, and I think I'm more well equipped than the other candidates in the race to direct, through legislation, the Department of Education, and support any administration's efforts to get that done. There aren't many teachers in Congress, there aren't many educators who are also legislators, and I think it's important to add our voice to the mix.
Right, because I think most people don't, like you're saying, maybe I'm wrong about this, kind of is underneath the underlying point of your message is a lot of people in Congress and the Senate and the House, the whole everything, I don't understand it all, but don't understand what goes into education and what issues have to deal with, even like in service days and how that doesn't really train them in a sense. You have a bug on your shoulder. You're welcome.
Thanks.
But cool.
Yeah.
So, So, I guess other big topics are kind of, I guess, women's rights in a sense. And that does mean women who, like, M to F. That does means women.
Yeah.
W-M, the whole everything. It doesn't, W-O-M-Y-N. I think there's a couple of other versions of that word that I'm totally missing on right now. But that kind of encapsulates like equal pay for equal work. How do you feel about that? I don't even know if it's a big issue for the 7th district. I presume it is, but. And then abortion, and then Planned Parenthood would kind of go into that and things like Planned Parenthood. But honestly, I only really know about Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. I mean, so when it comes to, what we call women's issues, I think, like, my experience starts from, my life with my mother, who as I mentioned, was pregnant with me in prison, and she, between my brother and I, my brother's 5 years older than me, to some degree had access to reproductive health services.
Right.
She had a number of abortions because she wasn't able to raise children, and I think I just start from the principle that, like, which should be uncontroversial but isn't, that, like, women should be in full control of their bodies at all times, like, period.
Yeah.
I don't think that should be controversial, but unfortunately it is, and I think there are a lot of men who need to do a lot of work on themselves to, like, really understand that, from their personal lives to, how they legislate. And that, so when I think about this issue, though, I also think about, what my mother went through when she had my brother and was pregnant with me, and I think it's important for us to create, conditions for all people, and women in particular, that allow them to flourish, whether that's having access to reproductive services, having a well-paying job that pays comparable to what men receive, having general access to healthcare, conditions that help them lead healthier lives,
right.
Without ever dictating to them how they should, use their bodies and, like, bring or not bring life into this world. Like, I think that is not a right of men to do ever, So I think one thing that I wish I heard more male politicians talking about was the work that men need to do to, change how they are, to better support women. So I think men need to be leading the conversation on, teaching boys to move away from rape culture and to some of these conversations about manhood that need to happen. So I've done that as someone who's worked in schools and developed curricula for young men to teach them how to better respect women, to teach them how to date ethically, how to, have like healthy, meaningful relationships with themselves and with women, right? So I've done that work. I've done that work with guys who are coming out of prison who, their perspective was, well, I'm gonna just, sort of treat women poorly because that's what gives them power to some extent, or makes them feel like they have power. And to sit with a young man and unravel that attitude it takes a lot, and it's important. So I would push for more programs that develop a healthier sense of manhood, because that's how we teach boys not to sexually assault women, how not to rape, how not to, just generally feel that they have some sort of control over women's bodies. And I think men need to really get together and work on us, but then also not legislate in a way that tries to tell women how to live their lives and how to, how control their own bodies, or not, So I think that's where I'm coming from. So I think like really focusing on our curriculum in schools, focusing on programs that get boys that we might see who are maybe more, at risk for that behavior into some sort of re-education program that says, look, this isn't about being macho. This is about like being a good American man means caring for American women, period. Not telling them that you control their bodies, because you don't. So what does that look like as a national campaign, for better manhood and real manhood? That's some of the stuff that I'm interested in.
That's a really, really awesome point and awesome thing to say in general. So, props,
Sure.
I guess. But I really like that you said that, because I think that's maybe a big part of the problem and why all these senators don't exactly, though senators that are men don't really care about women in the way that they should, seemingly.
I think it's about, I think, I agree with Hillary Clinton that like women's rights are human rights, and like if you believe that, then you need to, obviously give women the same deference you would give any other person, that they are an equal human. That's basically what feminism means, that you believe women are equal. And I really do. And I think every man is on his own journey to, I think, resist and to better understand some of the socialization that we get as men in the society that is pulling us in a negative direction in terms of how we treat women. And so as someone who's a leader, I want to push that process forward for young men in schools. Any way that we can reach them, I think that needs to be a priority for men. You can't look at the statistics about sexual assault in this country and rape and say that, is it 1 in 3? I think it is. And say that men don't have work to do. Like year to year, we should be like, what's the statistic? What are the rates right now on college campuses? And I don't necessarily think it's just harsher penalties. I think that's the trick, right? I think I think when bad behavior happens, like obviously it needs to be penalized, but I'd rather do preventative work that prevents a rape or prevents a sexual assault on the front end. And that means getting into a relationship and into engagement with men and sort of unraveling whatever it is that's causing them to feel that they have this right, that they have this what they believe is a right over women's bodies. And I think that's the hardest work. And a lot of male politicians won't talk to you about that, and that's because that requires them to like self-introspect a little bit about how they are, their attitudes, and how they've treated the women in their lives. And none of us are angels, but all we can do is commit to getting better and doing that in concert with other men. And that'd be my commitment.
That's a good commitment.
Yeah.
It could be okay. No, we touched on that. Sorry. So the next two are kind of more or less the same thing, but they're kind of not, because I think they're a little separate. Big thing. I think last week or the week before, I can't remember, there was a bill that was passed in the PA legislature regarding schools, and I think it passed like 28.
It's the guns and teachers
the guns and teachers
yeah,
bill.
Yeah.
I don't know if it passed the second part or not. I'm not sure about that.
I think the governor's going to veto it. I think it has passed out of the legislature.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings gun control. I guess how do you feel about gun control?
I think we have to do everything we can to prevent horrific acts like what happened to Bianca Roberson, in Chester County the other day, where she's driving down the road and she's a high school graduate and on her way to college in Florida, I believe, and a man just pulls out a gun and murders her on the highway. Like, I want to do everything I can to make sure that families aren't victims of horrific violence. And again, like, let's look at the numbers. Like, if we're talking 10,000 gun deaths a year in this country, like, that's a national security issue. It's a human security issue. So I think we have to do everything we can, to protect families. That's what I'm about, and so, maybe background checks would have prevented, Bianca's murder. Maybe, I don't know. There's probably other particular policies that could have been in place preventing that gentleman from, and I hesitate to say gentleman, from having a gun, having access to that gun. But, we through our policies, we allow a lot of families in our country to be victimized. We really do. And I think it's something that we need to get much more serious about.
Okay.
So, I think that takes a lot of different shapes. I'm in favor of background checks. I think that's huge.
Now, when you say background checks, a thing that comes to mind is mental health. Would you include mental health in those background checks and things like that? I'm not sure how that would work.
Yeah, short on specifics a little bit here, but I think that's absolutely got to be a factor in sort of, and I think there's a way that doesn't stigmatize the mental health community, because I think immediately we run to, the person's sort of whatever, and we use these words that aren't really clinical words, that actually stigmatize the community that exists. I think many people in our community, many more than numbers might suggest, are struggling with mental health issues. So we needn't stigmatize them and say, treat them as a monolith and say, well, that happened because the person is. That shows our fundamental misunderstanding of real mental health issues, right? But yes, I do think that expert professional opinions on, if a doctor says in their expert opinion that this person isn't qualified to, possess a firearm, then we should follow that, and the same we would with someone getting behind the wheel of a car or operating any kind of heavy machinery. There's a reason those things are in place. So particularly with guns, I think they should be in place. But I do think we really need to, however we structure our policies, reduce the number of, gun deaths that occur and inflict our families on a year-to-year basis in this country. And we have to be metrics-driven and stories-driven about that.
Yeah.
Because we're allowing tens of thousands of Americans every year to be victims, and it's insane.
Yeah. I guess the other thing I get kind of a bit in relation to guns is, that's a lovely lawnmower.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's a generator.
Oh, generator.
Yeah.
Oh, is it the car there?
I think it's the ice cream truck, yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, ice cream is delicious.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have any today. But, the next point is, it's a little bit related to guns. It's more about police and how we train them. Because, we've all seen the national news of the past 3, 5, 7 years now, and how these police officers, their first instinct is to shoot. That's what they first do. And they get away with it, which, it isn't good that they get away with it. That's another thing, protections for police need to be treated as people, in my opinion, when they go to the court, go through the process of being whatever. But how, I guess the question is, how do you feel about how, I don't know if you would have anything to do with how police are trained, or if you have something in the realm of your power in this area, because even I, like, over the past, maybe in January, I was getting off the train very late, walking to where my car was. I was coming back from some kind of rally or something, and dressed in strange garb, and the police officer that was driving on, I think it was Bryn Mawr Avenue, stopped me, and I was just walking to my car. I mean, it was like 1 in the morning, so it was late, but I know everyone watching this video can't see me, but I'm white, I'm pretty normal, and I'm not saying that white people are less victimized, but they are. But that's just an example of being targeted because you're dressed strangely or whatever. And I guess what you, spot please. I guess, what do you want to do about that? About about the police targeting people and all of that, and the training of them, and how can we change that and make it better?
I mean, I guess I generally just start from the principle that I would like to reduce violence in our communities for our families, period, right? So I've got friends and family on both sides of the badge. So, you know, my dear good friend from childhood, Cletus, who's now a police officer in Seattle, I don't want to see him gunned down, ever. I don't want to see his family hurting. And at the same time, you know, I have friends and even kids I've taught whose family members were victims in police-involved shootings, and you know, I don't want to see that happen to them either. So I think there are ways that we need to de-escalate the situation. I think police, there are certain departments that we can look at, and I think Seattle might be one of them, where, you know, they're under federal court order, but they are practicing and training in de-escalation tactics, and they're really looking at the numbers and saying, you know, who are we stopping, and what is it yielding, and why are we stopping them, and really digging into that information and saying, like, are we living up to our best values and how we police? You know, fortunately there was like a recent shooting in Seattle that I don't think lives up to those values, but and I think that's getting people together to the table, and I think, you know, police unions would agree that they want their officers to be safe and safer. You know, they're one of the leading groups that's standing up for, you know, smarter protections, you know, in terms of how we think about our firearms in society, and you know, protecting families from being victims of firearms. So, you know, bring them to the table with families, you know, who have been victims, and say, how do we make it safer for people on both sides of the badge? I think that's a national conversation we need to have. And unfortunately, out of all these horrific incidents that we now get to watch on video, on TV all the time, we haven't pulled together that conversation. And I certainly don't think it's going to happen under this administration. You know, there are communities on both sides of the badge hurting. You know, that horrific incident when 5, you know, police officers in Dallas were gunned down. You know, we have all these opportunities to bring people together and say, how do we reduce police killings? And how do we reduce the number of Americans who are killed in police-involved shootings? You know, and follow the law, and prosecute, you know, people on both sides of the badge when they break the law. And then also, I think there's a host of preventative things that we can do before any of this stuff happens, in terms of training, in terms of support for communities. And this is where it gets highly intersectional in terms of the other policy areas that we can bring together to make sure that certain communities aren't targeted because they're poor, or because they're a certain color, or, you know, because people are dressed a certain way or whatever, you know. So I think it's broader than just like training for police, but I think that is a really important issue where de-escalation and safety really has to be the priority, because the community is not safer when, you know, folks are acting more aggressively in these situations. It actually makes the community more dangerous, as exemplified by the murders that we've seen, and you know, just how those communities are feeling. They don't feel safe when they're policed in a way that escalates the situation. So I think it's got to come back to that. Like, how many community members are we keeping alive with our policing versus ones that are dying? and how communities are feeling about the way that they're kept safe. You know, I think it's got to come down to those facts and figures. You know?
Yeah.
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 It's not that, I don't think it's that complicated, but you know, I don't want to like betray. I think it can get messy and can get complicated, but I think bringing people together and starting from the principle of public safety, like in the truest sense, it can't just be, oh, you know, I feel threatened, and so therefore on both sides of the badge, like I'm going to react aggressively.
Right, because that doesn't work out for
it's dangerous.
anyone.
It's really dangerous.
Really doesn't. So what I was going to talk about, which changed when my mind went on that trajectory, which made sense. So I'm pretty passionate about LGBTQIA and the rest of the entire alphabet rainbow unicorn soup and gender issues. I don't know enough about PA exactly if they've created some kind of HB2 like law or if there's anything related to that, but I'll be completely honest, there are times if the women's restroom line is long, I go into the men's room because I am not waiting. I have a tiny bladder, it's not going to wait.
Right.
The question is, I guess, where do you stand on all of that? Do you care how people...
About bathrooms specifically?
About bathrooms,
Yeah.
do you care how people identify? Sorry. Do you care... I think it's so accepted now, but do you care who people love and why they love that person? And then there may not necessarily be anything that you can do about this, but are you for like trans people marrying? Are you against trans people marrying? Are you against like a trans marrying a gay person? Like you know what I mean? Like, are you for good things and happy things when it comes to those people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm for love. I came into this world because two men loved each other and decided that they loved me too. And, you know, that's what I knew growing up, and they were straight up with me that, you know, my mom struggled and couldn't take care of me and was friends with them, and they loved me, you know, more than anything. And so I start from that premise. Like, I came into this world because two people reached across difference and decided to care for me. And so that's just built into my DNA to sort of be completely open and accepting. And, you know, I've had family members struggle with, you know, when my one dad died, my other dad couldn't get access to him, you know, in the hospital before he died. That was crushing to our family. After he passed, you know, my dad had access getting